بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Let's go straight to the topic. I think that's the best thing to do. The world has, since the beginning of presence of humanity on this planet, has sought to make something out of this world. Maybe an attempt at a global control, global movement, global something. Even from early on, we can go back to the Roman empires and before the Romans and the Greek and the Byzantines, etc., etc. And many people, many historians and anthropologists and others, they try to classify human phases sort of this life or the era that we live in. So they say there's a prehistoric era or pre-modern era, and then there's the modern era, and then there's the post-modern era. And every era comes with its own sort of global, social, economic, political, even religious ideas in every era, more or less. So the pre-modern era is preceding, for example, or around the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. That's when it ends. And then the modern era starts more or less around 1600 CE, Common Era. And then the modern era goes all the way up until 1940, 1945, when you have now the postmodern era. And many of you may remember, obviously, looking at that. And the modern era was the Industrial Revolution in Europe, for example, oftentimes was called the era of the early Romantic era, the era of Enlightenment. All these things were talked about during that era. And then the postmodern era came about year 1948 and until now. And a couple of things that distinguish every era from the other, obviously, many things, such as what's real. What is real in the pre-modern era was supernaturalism. That's real. Supernatural things are real in the pre-modern era. In the modern era became naturalism, and then in the postmodern era is more anti-realism. The epistemology in the postmodern, or in the pre-modern era, in the pre-modern era was mysticism. That's the epistemology. In the modern era was objectivism, basically objectivism meaning experience and reason. In the postmodern era, social subjectivism. Who am I as a human being? In the pre-modern era, to some cultures and some faith systems, either, original sin, either subject to God's will, that's who I am, regardless who you are, regardless where you stand on the faith scheme. Dualism. In the modern era, autonomy. Nurture, nature combo, sort of. In the postmodern era, social determinism, group conflict, reductionism. Those are some of the things that when we talk about human nature. As far as ethics in the pre-modern era, collectivism was the thing in the pre-modern era. In the ancient days, collectivism, altruism. In Islam we call it ithar. You favor others over yourself. We, not I. In the modern era became individualism, and that obviously from 1948 and beyond, egalitarianism became ethics. So maybe selective egalitarianism as well. As far as things that happen and the world continue to sort of, like I said, this issue of being a global village It became a global village only now because, in a sense, we have means to commute and communicate. But the idea of having sort of a global village, I think, was always there in many cultures and in many faith systems as well. We still have ongoing attempts to construct every era. And many people argue now that the world is undergoing an era that's forming, that's beyond the postmodern era. So now we are beyond that postmodern era, and it's coming with lots of things, obviously. Many of you may have heard of Francis Fukuyama and his End of History work. And these kinds of this kind of thinking, and obviously think tanks and research papers, they do shape the era that we're in and maybe provide it with many things. Francis Fukuyama says in his End of History book, he says that is basically, end of history is I quote, the end point of mankind's ideological evolution. There's no more ideological evolution. And the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. And by that is not just a political system. This is talking about, and I quote, universal and homogeneous state, incorporating, obviously, most likely, elements of liberal and social democracy. That's one thing. You've got also Samuel P. Huntington, as many of you may remember, during the Carter era, and he was the White House coordinator for security planning for the National Security Council, and he was best known for his 1993 theory on the clash of civilization. End of history, clash of civilization, and where he argued that future wars, Huntington argued, future wars would be fought not between countries, but between cultures. And he identified 7 major global civilizations, so sort of a source of things that may be clashing, obviously. Western civilization, Latin American, Islamic, Chinese, Hindu, Orthodox, Japanese, and African. But Huntington claims that Islamic extremism would become the biggest threat to world peace back in 1993 in his book. I couldn't find his definition of Islamic extremism, and he also argues, basically in his book, to understand current and future conflict, cultural rifts must be understood, and culture, he says, rather than the state, must be accepted as the reason for war. But notice, he says, thus Western nations will lose predominance if they fail to recognize the irreconcilable nature of cultural tensions. But what's very interesting here is that he puts Islam as a culture rather than as a faith system, for example. And he puts that he identifies that basically if you compare with African, Japanese, etc. All right. Versus Western, as if Western, for example, is just a set of values irrespective of faith, etc., maybe ignoring the diverse systems or faith systems in there. Anyway, similar thinkers and think tanks who end up shaping global policy and world order in one way or another have contributed to some kind of this. All this doesn't only affect cultures, but also Muslim communities, because as you see, many thinkers like Huntington singled out Islam in the context of a culture, though Muslims have variable ethnicities, cultural backgrounds, etc. I mean, a Muslim in Albania or in Kosovo or Bosnia or in Chechnya, and right there in the heart of Europe, for example, in Montenegro or other places may behave differently than, or the culture may be different than a Muslim in Indonesia, for example, or in Malaysia, or in the Philippines, or someone in Africa, or someone in India, or Pakistan, or the Arab world, etc. That's one thing there. The other thing, on a scientific level, Western societies have struggled through the relationship of religion and science, as you all know. And I mean, that goes also back from the Martin Luther sort of reform movement to the John Calvin's, sort of movement, to the Church of England formation and the split, obviously, between Catholicism and etc. You all know the whole thing and all that. And a lot of it was not just about reform. Sure, religious reform was important and was needed, but also about that strange relationship that religion has always had with science, in a bigger word here. The emergence of with the emergence of a global village set of social and acceptable values nowadays, religion has taken a backseat almost entirely, because the perception of conflict between religion and science gave rise not just to atheism within cultures or communities of faith, whether they're Muslim, Jewish, Christian, or anyone else that's just beyond the Abrahamic faith system, but also the formation of, or supporting the formation of a universal liberal values as an enforceable set of values that are accepted, and that's the norm. Beyond that, it's not really normal. You're not normal. Doesn't matter what your faith affiliation may be. As you all know, I mean, today wars are waged on the basis of such values, and other peoples are looked down upon simply if they don't participate to sort of values that are presented, whether they're based on the norm standard that's presented. Religious communities, obviously, they are trying to come back, whether Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, or other. They're trying to come back and to see what is the relationship of religion with science. Is it that of conflict, like it used to be, or it still is to many communities? Is it independence? You do your thing, I do my thing. So I'm not going to bother you. I'm not going to call you heretic. You don't call me stupid, and we're okay then. We can live together, and that's fine. Or is it that of dialogue? Or is it that of integration? So religious communities or communities of faith are working together. Obviously, I don't want to go into that discussion, maybe some other time. But in all that, obviously, you see that societies have gone and have sort of moved along the way of making these choices and talking about these things. The question is, where are we, Muslim communities? Seems that the Muslim communities have missed out on a lot of that. We're still trying to catch up to the modern era, let alone the post-modern era shaping of the world. We're trying to catch up. And today, further, obviously, we can say, today Muslims wake up to a strange depiction of Islam in the world, not just in the West, in the world. Terrorism, extremism, hate speeches, political ideologies, rather than religion. All that stuff is sort of coupled and mixed and Islamic put next to it to make it seem as if it is Islamic. And Muslims are looking at it and they're saying, I don't recognize that. And I'm being called to be reactive to something that I can't, that is strange for violence, hate, and all that stuff. Muslims don't understand that stuff because that never was in the name of Islam. Never, it can be in the name of Islam, for Islam does not recognize violence as ethical to start with, nor viable with its codes or consistent with its ethics. So then, today we are in this world and we're asking ourselves, what happened to the religious discourse, Islamic religious discourse? Is this the end, the clash of history, or the end of history, or the clash of civilization module being sort of worked? And since Islam or Islamic extremism, which is really remain undefined, what does Islamic extremism mean? I'd rather define violence, and violence as evil, regardless who commits it, in whichever name, whatever name. But sometimes when we throw things like that, what does that mean? Does that mean people who commit violence, regardless of faith, whether Muslims or not? All right, that's something obviously all Muslims are for. But again, was the Islamic religious discourse kidnapped? what happened? What's going on? What seems to be the problem? Surely we're jubilating every time, especially in the masajid, when people accept the faith and they, pronounce the shahada, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, but sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But oftentimes we don't realize that communities of faith are losing in general, rather than winning in general, especially the ritualistic ones, meaning those who focus on rituals rather than a wholesome approach of ritual and spiritual. What is the reason for this falling behind or being set back? In the beginning of the past Gregorian century, beginning of the last century Gregorian, some thinkers have tried to sort of analyze what's going on, what happened. People like Muhammad Abdo in Egypt, Muhammad Rashid Rida, people like that. What they obviously were depicted as reformists. And they tried to say, and that's post the Ottoman collapse, they tried to say, many of them and others, I'm just throwing a couple of names here, there's many others obviously. They tried to say the reason for Muslim community setback is militarily, because after the collapse of the Ottomans, there is no one strong military that protects Muslim communities. So they became open prey for anyone under any name that can come, and they became colonized. Others, they say, well, really setback and falling back was not just military, but was academic, was political, such as the emergence of this the one and only leader theory, that every nations can only bring one leader, and that's it. He's the one and the only, and without him, the whole nation it's him or the nation, and that came in many societies. That's the one. And sort of exaggerative, erecting figures rather than facts. And Islam came to actually abolish sort of idols. Islam came to say that we're all radically equal before God. But anyway, there was also economic setbacks. In the past century, obviously, as you know, that most Muslim communities were on agriculture, while industry was advanced already on the other side in Europe. But even that agricultural industry or economy was hit with overtaxation, corruption, etc., all that stuff, There was also social setbacks in Muslim community, mainly injustice to women in the name of culture, religion, whatever, all that business. But obviously, that injustice to the women in general took place in many societies, and oftentimes justification were made, whether tribal or religious, though Islam came to give X, Y, and XX, if I may use that term, absolutely equal or radical equity before God as accountable human beings. But also social strata emerged in societies, the people who have, who are a few, and the rest who don't have, and that also set back the whole society. People did not feel part of their countries or communities. Actually, they hated those communities with a passion. They wanted to work against them. They wanted to run away from them at any and every price because they felt disenfranchised from them. Another also setback that was identified in the past century, we're talking about 100-some years ago, is also academic in the sense of what? Separating the sciences of the religion from the sciences of the world, or life sciences or worldly knowledge from religious knowledge. And there was a notion, and that's what Muhammad Abdo was trying to do in Egypt, there was a notion to say that in the beginning of the last century, that world sciences, chemistry, physics, math, all that stuff doesn't belong with religion, and that's not really beneficial knowledge. Yani as if the focus was ilm la yanfa, al-ilm al-nafi'. The Prophet ﷺ says, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa'. Oh Allah, I seek refuge to you from a knowledge that's not beneficial. Some took that to make it look like the ilm, the knowledge that's not beneficial, is anything other than dini knowledge, fiqh, tafsir, hadith, etc. But math, chemistry, all that stuff, that's not really important. Though that's not contradictory to the prophetic instruction, as in Sahih Muslim, and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ihris ala ma yanfa'uk." You should be keen to learn that which is beneficial to you. And therefore, another hadith also fi Sahih Muslim, and Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, "Man nafasa an mu'minin kurbatan min kurabi dunya." Whoever helps a fellow brother to ease a difficulty in the dunya, in the world, in this life, Allah Ta'ala will help ease his or her difficulty in the hereafter. But we did not put emphasis on that. The emphasis in the beginning of the last century was, all right, either religion or others. These are ulum of the kuffar, And then from the ilm of the religion, which we say ilm, and therefore we used to call the person who has ilm alim. And alim obviously comes from alam. And alam means the world, because at that time, even religious scholars before, in the era of where people were learning, those who were alim, they actually knew the alam. And amongst their religious studies were not just religious studies of exegesis and jurisprudence and spirituality and religious law, but was also mathematics, was also chemistry. In fact, I still have many ijazahs from our shuyukh, rahimahullah ta'ala, who actually says, I authorize him in fiqh and in mathematics. The old style where you had to learn things the old way. And these things were going on. But we've reduced now alim, knowing the world. And that's why you see, for example, scholars in the subcontinent. Hundreds of years ago, they wrote in 2, 3, 4 languages. They wrote in Arabic, they wrote in Persian, they wrote in this, they wrote on that. And you saw them that they were, and that's scholars everywhere, regardless. Because there was that, all right, I need to know, if I need to be alim, I need to know the alam. I can't just know one little thing. That doesn't make me a alim. And but what happened in the evolution of that, so we left now the worldly sciences under the issue, under the pretext that it's not as important. This will get you to Jannah, this will not necessarily help you. To now, the ilm becomes now only fiqh. No more علم القرآن, علوم السنة, hadith, الأصول, etc. Now fiqh. So people focus on fiqh. Fiqh means how to worship. So we send the kids to 6 years to schools or 4 years or whatever, and they learn of the ahkam, the rules of how to worship, how to worship. This makes your salah valid, this makes your siyam valid, this makes your zakah valid, this makes your pilgrimage valid, this makes your fasting valid, or this makes them invalid. You know them, all right, great. And then, now we didn't just now learn all fiqh, jurisprudence of all Muslim schools, let's say within us, Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the 4 schools that are still documented, but we went to one school out of them. And then we didn't just go to one school and we were ignorant of the rest of the 3 schools. We went to a subset, a school within that school, and we were ignorant of the whole madhab in a sense, and as a whole, let alone the other madhab within Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah in that sense. And then we've called that ilm, or mufti, or whatever you want to call it. And so you see, as Muslims started at the beginning, unfortunately, or there's abandoning the Quran, which is the unconditional, the book that brings unconditional mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the worlds, to abandoning the Quran to the ahadith, to narrations. And today Muslims, the sectarian strifes and the sectarian struggles and people slandering each other and even killing each other, it's not about the Quran. It's about narrations, ahadith. You have this hadith, oh no, I have the other hadith. The Quran is not technically, practically abandoned, mahjur. So we've done hajr of the Quran behind us. Quran, we use it for ceremonial purposes. We want to open a ceremony, speech, we give the Quran. Someone dies, we put the Quran. If you don't think it's bid'ah, someone, whatever. That's basically. But then the Quran is abandoned as the book of Allah Ta'ala that was revealed to all, basically, to narrations. And then we've left the prophetic sunnah, the narrations, we abandoned that as well now to the sayings and statements of imams and big figures. Then we've abandoned the statements of knowledgeable imams and big figures to the statements of preachers and public speakers and activists and students and ambitious people and wannabes. And we made that deen. Who's to blame? What's going on? What do we do? Colonization. All right, let's blame something, because we have to blame something. So let's blame colonization. Istimar. Sure, colonization is slavery, different form of slavery. It destroys the fabric of the human being. Doesn't just rob what the human being has. It takes time for that to recover, for that stuff to become normal. But does Islam allow us to submit to the idea that the aggression and the atrocious notion of occupation or of colonization ought to kill and rob the soul of the occupied? Wasn't the message of Jesus, Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, a reform message against sort of some kind of dogma that was put there politically, religiously, and socially? Wasn't that also the message of Moses, Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, that was a reform message against that sort of dogma that was enforced on people? Wasn't that the message of Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam? Colonization left. But after colonization left, you said, all right, so colonization powers left. Why don't you now pick up and catch up? Well, post-colonization, we have this post-colonization syndrome and the Stockholm syndrome. I'm not going to talk about the Stockholm one. You can look that up. But the colonization, the sensitivity syndrome from colonization. We, in general, Muslim communities, became very sensitive from anything that comes from the West. Because anything that comes from the West, they thought, many of them, that's trying to rob them of whatever is left of their religion or culture. So they looked at it very suspiciously. There were revolutions, violent ones oftentimes. People got killed. You know, colonizing powers were forced to leave. They did not leave out of their own accord, in a sense. There were, you know, violence erupting everywhere. So the Algeria example, obviously the India, you may argue that Gandhi's movement with the British only emerged non-violently to a large extent. But when you look at Algeria, you look at others, you look at many places, you see there was lots of violence to sort of force the colonizer out. After that happened, there was a precipitation of that sensitivity and fear that everything that comes from there is actually evil, because it's going to rob you from things. Now, this may have something and may not. Obviously, for many observers, colonization never really left. It left militarily, but not socially, but not economically, not politically. Anyway, that's an opinion that's there, and that people, you know, all these. I'm not a politician anyway, but you know, there's that notion that these people were not really sort of free. It's not just about depriving them from the opportunity, but also creating the capacity for chaos, creating the capacity for lack of education and lack of progress. Anyway. Maybe right, maybe wrong. Not everything, obviously. Surely, when people defined the postmodern era, which we were living in from the 40s until maybe recently, because I think we're now beyond the postmodern era. But the postmodern era was defined as a broad movement across the world, global, in the mid to the late 20th century, across philosophy, arts, architecture, criticism, which marked departure from modernism. Obviously, it's encompassing broad range of ideas, but postmodernism is typically defined by an attitude of skepticism, irony, rejection towards grand narratives, grand ideas, religious ideas, and various tenets of universalism. And obviously, such as, like I said, social progress, moral universalism, absolute truth, objective reality, and that's all. I mean, what's objective reality? We'll talk about that maybe some other time. But these things were there, and they were sweeping the world. And the people who were just off of colonization and sort of semi-slavery, in the sense they were sensitive that they didn't know what to do. But all that is not really a reason. That may be true in some aspect. There may be true some kind of enforcement of such ideas and such narratives on weaker cultures, or maybe not weaker cultures, meaning weaker in a sense of understanding, of orientation of the world. But that should not really be a reason for the community, Muslim communities, not to take good things, because at the end of the day, we're human beings and humanity has lots of good. All humanity has lots of good in it. There's lots of khair in humanity towards humanity and with humanity. And humanity can, and I always say, if we can actually forget the political issues and sometimes even the religious preaching that's divisive and hateful, if we put that aside, humanity can build bridges with each other and can actually try to persevere to force peace in a non-violent way on earth. But that's an ally of the willing, and that's not easy. The reason for that is religion has often been painted as the cause of all major wars in history. Hey, religion caused that, religion caused that, religion caused that. Where in fact, the causes of all conflicts in history are one of three things: greed, envy, and ambition. But in an order or an effort to sanitize them, these self-serving emotions have often been cloaked in religious rhetoric. That's the only way we can mobilize the masses. He's not like you. He hates you for you. And Islam always pushed us to be careful from this political divisiveness or religious divisive marketing from those who want to sow hate between humanity so they can sort of live off of that division. Still, the academic progress within Muslim societies was still slow upcoming, and the academic state today is not in the best situation. For that, what we said, and also some said that colonization or the colonizing powers left another effect, and that other effect is made us have zuhud in the deen, in religious knowledge. What does that mean? As the istimar or these colonizing powers, we saw them, they have the world. They had trains at that time. Obviously, I'm talking at the beginning of that century, and everyone was dressed, in a certain way. And you saw, if you go back to pictures in the past century, you saw how people even tried to make their mustache look like someone in the West. They would wear things like that. They would do things the way they want to do because they thought they've mastered the dunya, they've got it. And we want to do that. And that also generated in what is called the elite layers of society a zuhud or a detachment from religious knowledge as a force of taking you back even further. The reason we were behind is because of religious knowledge, and if you go to religious knowledge, that's going to upset you even more back. Abandon all that stuff, it's all nonsense or almost, and let's do this. So what we did now, obviously it's also imitation of the colonizer because of the post-religious issue with Christianity in Europe, obviously from the 1800, from the 1600 actually onwards. So we also in the Muslim world decided to send all underachievers to religious schools. So son, if you can't make it anywhere, obviously in the beginning of the past century, you're supposed to be either a physician or an engineer. Because that's what it was. If you're not a doctor or an engineer, all right, whatever. If you fail absolutely in everything, son, go become an imam. Why not? And I'm telling you about a general thing that was happening in the Muslim world. And that should not have a blemish onto those people who are working on the field. But we've sent underachievers. I don't want to say people who are not good because that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm saying academically underachievers. I'm not saying not good people, excellent people. Well, I mean, people like me and you, good, bad, and ugly. It's a mirror of society, irrespective of what. But underachieving, whereas at that time we needed actually something to bring us back, actually to sort of have minds. We needed to send the overachievers to learn their faith and guide the community in the challenges that we were facing in the world. But instead we sent the underachievers, and we still do. That also increased the problems. Why are we talking today about this diagnostics? In my view, and I could be wrong in many of it, and that's okay, that's normal. That's because there's hope. Sure, we have problems. There are challenges, but there's hope. We have problems in understanding things. Most Muslims, with all the respect, because they're just like everybody else. They're busy doing their life, working their life. They're not religious scholars. And now with the emergence of the internet, which is a great blessing, amongst others, obviously. I mean, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly on the internet. But the internet also gave us a tool. But guess what? Whatever your eyes lay on first, that's what's right, usually. That's what leaves a lasting impression. So we come back now to the marketing power of ideas rather than the objective truth seeking. So we have problems in understanding our faith as Muslims. We also have problems in understanding our reality. Worse than all that, I think the Muslim community's problem has been, especially in Muslim majority communities. I'm not talking about the American Muslim community in general, but the Muslim communities in the world in general, especially Muslim majority communities, we became idea consumers. I'm not talking about buying an iPad, consuming products and merchandise. We consume ideas. We can generate ideas to help the world, to contribute to the world's progress. We wait for others to come up with an idea and manufacture it, and then we consume it. We're not producing ideas as much as we're consuming ideas, and that's istihlak fikri, I call that, rather than intaj fikri, and that's serious. We became to a level where we forbade questioning for knowledge. You can't ask questions. That's an off. Can't ask that question. Be careful, don't ask questions like that. Though religion came to allow you a concept of no question is off the table, you're allowed to ask every question so long you're trying to seek knowledge genuinely. Problems in reality because we have this confusion of religion and politics, especially in many Muslim majority communities, where we take a religious clothing and we clothe a political system or a political candidate or a political movement. And these people, they say, I am Islam and I am running, or I'm not running, but I am the solution because I am Islam, I am the Sunnah, I am this. And obviously that's a problem because that's a reductionist attitude. Once you reduce the faith into a person other than the Prophet ﷺ, you are doing a gross injustice and misrepresentation of the faith. For the faith is much bigger than any person or any regime or government or school of Islamic studies or anything. The religion is bigger than everyone. Really, it's the faith that Allah revealed Himself, the Creator, unto His Prophet ﷺ, and that's the only thing. We all aspire to emulate and learn, but we can't say we exclusively represent. So also the control or the emergence of the preaching, or I call it evangelical movement within Muslims. I'm saying this just because it's the easy term. Meaning you wake up for whatever reason, you say, well, I'm called to preach. Preach on, brother. So you start acquiring public speaking skills and you preach. And guess what? You dictate the agenda now because you're popular, you're a celebrity. And now what we've done to the common people, what I mean that by they're not specialized in Muslim theology, is we've injected them with emotions. We made the deen, the religion, just emotions. And there's nothing more dangerous to the religious literacy of the masses of Muslim than public speakers, preachers, wannabes, ambitious people masquerading as proxy and orthodoxy. Because it's now emotions. It's got nothing to do with anything. The young people, young Muslims, especially in the West, who face all kinds of currents outside, challenges inside the home and others, they're trying to see how can I build a bridge. And even Muslims outside. I travel the world. Unfortunately, I'm more traveling than settling in. I travel from the east to the west, from India, the Indian subcontinent, to Southeast Asia, to the Arab world, to Africa. And I see the youth are all the same. We really are in a global village. Today, there is really no difference in thinking. Sometimes even, obviously, the way we dress, the way we talk even the language used. I'm so amazed. I go to some countries, obviously they have rich cultures and languages, and they talk like here. They talk like me, in a sense. I mean, and between each other. So there is really no difference. I'm not saying anything. There's no more difference in the youth, in the mental frame of the youth, whether he's in Bangladesh or in Belgium, whether he's in Syria or Sweden, whether he's in Angola or in anywhere in the West. They're all thinking the same, and they're looking and seeing all kinds of things going on, and they're looking for a model, a role model. And we often try to bring figures again as role models rather than the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wa ashabihi wa azwajihi wa sallam himself. Somehow we've sort of thought that we can actually bring role models, and with that make it easier for people rather than connecting them with the very Prophet of God, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is rahma lil alameen. So therefore now we've dwarfed the faith into a role model. And therefore, obviously, because human role models who are not infallible will always conflict, and you all know the story, Muslim youth are very confused throughout the world, especially today with all the things that are happening, whether it's sectarian hatred, whether it's intra-Islamic problems, whether it is violence in the name of Islam, whether it's the onslaught, the depiction of Islam as evil, inherently violent faith. So in my name, let me say, I can't say I represent the faith, because only the Prophet ﷺ represents the faith fully. But in my name and in the name of those researchers, scholars, preachers, whoever who agree with me, let me tell the Muslim youth here and throughout the world that let me apologize for all of you. We are sorry. We are sorry because as people who are active in the field of da'wah and the deen, we did not provide you a good role model. We are sorry because we as activists, whatever you want to call us, we have failed in marketing a very precious commodity. And we are sorry. I am sorry. Because I did not understand the deen completely. I still am working on it. And I did not understand reality completely, and I'm still working on it. And we are sorry because we changed the religion into a job rather than a mission. We are sorry for politicizing religious speech and address. And we are sorry for making religion part of the tools to reach power, political and economic. We are sorry for the speech the speeches that incited intra-Islamic hate, that people started now calling others infidels, kafir, or mushrik, or mubtadi', or people of bid'ah. And we are sorry for not putting forward a Muhammadan example of akhlaq, of ethics and morality. So we are sorry on this moral performance and on the contradictions. We are sorry on the rigid approach to the faith and turning the faith, reducing the faith into rituals rather than a wholesome approach. We are sorry for presenting in Islam from the binoculars of the jama'ah, of the group, rather than rahma lil alameen. And the group ideology, the cult ideology, is what made or broke that Islam. All I can say is your role model was never in the scholarship per se, but in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for you and them. And one of the beauties of our faith is that there is no intermediary in Islam between you and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is your direct imam. And there's no intermediary between you and Allah. He is your Lord. And His book is there available in front of you. And the sunnah of His Prophet ﷺ is also available in front of you. Reach out to it. Seek scholarship to understand, but never erect them as veils or walls between you and Rasulullah ﷺ. Regardless. With all these issues, we come back to the setbacks, whether it's religious, cultural, social, etc. And they figured, obviously, Muslim communities figured that, look, we can't really take anything from the West in the past century because everything from the West is probably an attempt to recolonize us again. And we don't want to be colonized because the human being ought to be free. Allah created the human being free. We're all, like Sayyidina Umar said, we're all born free. But Muslim communities in the past century and until now, while it tried to sort of not import everything, it could not really, it could not stay away from modernization, but not in the academic way or in the, but in the materialistic way. How so? Well, we had to bring in electricity. We had to bring in TV. We had to bring in cars. We had to import planes. We had to import telephones. We had now to import the internet. But we imported all that stuff while keeping the same kind of religious awareness and even religious teachings. Many institutions until now in the Muslim world teach the same religious curriculum that was developed 300 years ago. There has been a separation now in the mind of people, or of many people, between modern technology and the mind that produced it, and why it was produced, and the means by which it was produced. We are taking modern technology, but then we're not aware of the mind that produced it, the reasons, the maqsad, the objectives, the means it was produced for. So we are importing all these gadgets and all these merchandise and all this merchandise, and we're not worried anymore about the knowledge and the mind and the philosophy that brought it. Well, that increases our setback. Why? Because you see, when you buy a cell phone at $1,000, you're buying an idea. The merchandise is not worth much in it. The idea is. You're buying an idea. And what you're buying in return of that idea, you're putting this hall filled with tomatoes, let's say, to buy one idea. You're giving all the raw materials to buy one idea, one small idea. Because what you're buying is an intellectual property, and what you're giving in return is everything that's raw that you have. And therefore, we can easily look at Muslim communities, Muslim majority communities, not here. In this country we have, obviously, but meaning we have as a country, as a collective society, not just as American Muslims. But you look at Muslim communities, how much they spend on academic research. I'm not talking about building big buildings and big malls. I'm talking about academic research. Then you will know. Don't worry about the slogans. Reasons are many for the setback. We can always blame externally, obviously, colonization. We can also, but the Quran Kareem always tells us that blame is never a solution, and if we have anyone to blame, is ourselves. We can blame internal reasons, such as dictatorships and authoritarianism and corruption, political, religious, economic, social, tyranny, religious tyranny as well, sure. I always say the difference between political tyranny and religious tyranny is very simple. Political tyranny may kill, may rob, may steal, may be corrupt. Religious tyranny does all that and more in the name of God. Allahu Akbar. You see it in front of you every day on TV. So what happened is then that societies emerged out of colonization by external forces to sort of authoritarianism by internal forces. And societies failed to establish a basic justice system. Just. I'm not talking about academically prosperous, economically prosperous, just a basic fair system where people are treated fairly. Most, if not all, Muslim majority countries have failed to do so. And justice is the basis of governance. Well, you can always also argue that no Western or Eastern system has been able to establish a just system completely and bring about peace on the face of earth. Today, the world is still suffering from violence and wars under different names and different labels, sometimes under religious labels, sometimes under political labels, sometimes under for democracy we need to kill a million people, sometimes for freedom we need to do all these things. And what's the use of democracy after you're dead? There is freedom in the other world, but there ought to be a way where the world comes together to try to work towards peace. There's another reason for setback. Money. Especially the discovery of oil and gas in the mid of the last century. In the Arabian desert, we've discovered oil, alhamdulillah. Oil is good, brings money, a lot of money. And obviously now lately gas as well, natural gas is plentiful there. And you would think that, okay, now with this now money that we can earn from this overwhelming production of oil and gas, we can actually invest in the Ummah to catch up academically, to catch up economically, to catch up socially, to catch up politically, to sort of close the gap and then bring us to a very nice academic, social system, etc., having idea production to the world, to help the world, humanity in general, not just to be consumer of ideas, but to actually bring ideas and generate ideas to actually produce young, great Muslims, whether they're from India or Indonesia or the Arab world or Africa or Europe, who understand the world, contribute to humanity, and they have Islamic touch on them. They understand their faith. They understand their culture. But instead of rising to the level, the academic, the social, the political level, and then enriching the academic field, instead of doing that, a lot of that money that we've gathered in the past century went to, instead of importing all the knowledge from out, closing the gap, you want to import, you want to close that gap. You want to bring people up. You want people to learn the good that other humans have. And money can help you do that. But instead of doing that, then what we did with the money is exporting, not importing. We've exported the nomadic desert Arab school of Islam. There's no problem with Bedouins. I love Bedouins. The Bedouin, the desert, the Arabian desert is a good place. But the desert and the people in the desert never really cared much about academic achievement and research. If you look throughout the Muslim world, it was Baghdad, was Sham, was Cairo, was Morocco, was India, was these places where Malaysia, Indonesia, these were places where you've had this production, overwhelming knowledge produced. Instead of sort of fudging the gaps and finessing the differences and us importing that knowledge, arming ourselves to understand the world and understand our faith in the context of the world today, we've actually paid all that money to export a desert understanding of Islam to the world. Billions of dollars went to market this kind of school of Islam that is nomadic, desert, and billions of dollars were spent worldwide to take it globally. We took it from there globally, everywhere, establishing universities and schools and mosques and centers all over the world to teach this sort of nomadic desert Arab understanding of Islam that came from the desert in the past 100 years or so. And we put in the minds of the youth, because of the power of money that could print, open schools, print books, have conferences, do all these things, we've put in their mind that this is Islam, and any other understanding of Islam is not Muslim or not a good Muslim. This is what people call Salafism or Wahhabism. I'm not trying to say that Wahhabism is the school of all Bedouins, nor am I saying, or Salafism, nor am I saying that everyone who calls himself Wahhabi or Salafi is takfiri and violent. No, that's not true. I have had the honor of learning on the hands of many prominent Salafi scholars, and I only pray that Allah Ta'ala grants them the highest level of Jannah. One of my scholars that I learned from was Sheikh Abdulaziz bin Baz, rahmatullahi alayhi, of Saudi Arabia. Many of you may have heard of him. But this school that came from there is not the only school representing Islam. Despite the spread and despite the power that was spread in the world, surely not everyone who is considered a Wahhabi or a Salafi is violent. But in my view, Wahhabis themselves, or Salafis themselves, if they like to call that, they themselves are victims, Dahiyya. They're victims for those who told them that Islam is all that you know, and that Islam teaches you hate against other Muslims who disagree with you. And that Islam tells you that because you consider what others do may be bid'ah, maybe an innovation, or a difference in opinion, that is a reason for you to hate them, belittle them, and look down at them. That intellectual terrorism that you were taught made you a victim of your own faith. This intellectual desertification, if you want to call it. So we brought the desert, and we've had tasahhur fikri, intellectual desertification. We wanted people to think in a very simple, it's one way, that's it, it's ritualistic, do it that way. That intellectual desertification that's exclusive, that thinks anyone who does not believe like them has a doubtful Islam. That's the fikr, or that's the school today that's being exploited most in the scenes of violence in the name of Islam in the world today. Because all these acts of violence, unfortunately, they all resort back to that school. So there has to be some revisionism, so you don't remain victim of that. Islam is much bigger than a nomadic Arab desert school that is exclusive to one understanding. Somebody says, look, today after 9/11 especially, and after the emergence of ISIL and all that relationship with Salafism or Wahhabism and all that, you're seeing the death of Wahhabism. Or Salafism will die eventually. It's dying. Don't you see that there hasn't been any war on the Mawlid this year like usual? Usually around the Mawlid time or the prophetic birth commemoration time, usually there used to be wars all the time. You are mushrik, no, I'm not mushrik. You are mubtadi', no, I'm not mubtadi'. You are kafir, you know the whole story. And many argue that, look, this year, many actually Salafis went to say it's permissible to have a celebration of the prophetic birth. In fact, I've just received a couple of 3-4 weeks ago a fatwa from the head of the الأمر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر, the Hay'a in Mecca, al-Ghamidi, Shaykh al-Ghamidi, to say that it's okay to celebrate Valentine's Day, not just the... No. He says this is a social thing. It's a social thing, it's not a religious thing. Oh, is that what people said about the Mawlid as well? It's a social gathering. So they say then Mawlid is no longer kufr and shirk, The problem with this is, in my view again, is there needs to be academic revisionism, not just change of rhetoric to make the rhetoric soft. That takfir that was ingrained, that tabdi' that was ingrained, that calling other a mushrik or erecting walls of hate, suspecting the hearts of other people, that needs to have a proper academic revisionism. Not just saying good words, that's lip service. And I think we need to have that, and we need to encourage academic revisionism for our brothers. Because it should not be just cosmetic surgery. And the Muslims, also Muslims everywhere, obviously because, the presence of our Salafi brothers and Wahhabi brothers is everywhere in the world in general, and it's very prominent. We need them to look into things in a revisionist way and go back to the book and the authentic prophetic sunnah rather than an intellectual desertification of the minds of young Muslims, to turn it into a desert rather than a Jannah of ideas. That's where the minds ought to clash, not the hearts. We can't also afford to wait until they mature intellectually and academically on all that intellectual terrorism that has been spread for the past decades. I don't want you to think, again, I'm trying to take a cheap shot at them. Like I said, I have learned from many of my Salafi shuyukh. Allah have mercy on their souls and bless them and grant them Jannah. Yeah, so you don't say Sufis are the same, in the sense that today, for the first time, for the past few years, I start hearing about takfiri Sufis. If you disagree with them, they call you kafir as well. It's sort of, what's the difference? That's Wahhabism, brother. Slanderous, I've met them in the West especially. They turned the Sufism, which is supposed to be ihsan or tazkiyah, into a cult practice. And if you disagree with them, you're slandered with the worst kinds of slander. But that's usually not reflective of most of them. We have not heard Sufis being involved in actual terrorism or violence anyway, most likely. And what I mean by tasawwuf, to me, I mean ihsan and tazkiyah and the Junaidi Ghazali tasawwuf that's based on the book and the sunnah. To me, La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah is very, very precious. That kalima tayyibah is very precious. So everyone who says La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah is a Muslim, so long there's no negation of it. That earns all my love and all my respect, no matter how much I disagree with on the details. So therefore I love the Muslim who calls himself Wahhabi and Salafi, though I'm accused of being Sufi, and which is an honor I will not deny, or an honor I can't claim, and an accusation I will not deny. But I love that. If a Muslim, he calls himself Salafi, I love you, brother, even though I disagree with you. under Islam, within Islam. And I love the Muslim who calls himself Shi'i, even though I disagree with him theologically. And I love the Muslim who is Ibadi. We call them Khawarij. We and the Shia both call them Khawarij. They don't like to be called that way, and it's probably unfair anyway. And they're the majority of the Muslims in Oman and southern Algeria. They're good people. And I love them also. They're not Sunnis, nor are they Shi'is. But I have only love and respect for them, though I disagree with them on creedal issues, just like with our Shia brothers, just like with the Wahhabi brothers or the Salafi brothers, just like with the Mu'tazila. Even if these issues are unsolvable, irreconcilable, so long we are within La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, I have all the love and the respect for them as Muslims with full rights and privileges. I will never erect walls of hate or preach hate against them, irrespective of what. Yes, sure, we will disagree, and it becomes very heated, academic disagreement. And I claim that as a Sunni Muslim who follows Imam Shafi'i, for example, school, etc., that I think that I am righteous in the sense, in my views, and in the sense, Allah Ta'ala is the judge. You say La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah and you don't negate that, hey, you have my love and respect. I don't believe in cultism, and I refuse to turn the religion to reduce our grand faith into cults, whether on this side or that side or any side. And we ought to all refuse the abuse of faith to make one community of faithful of Muslims hate another community of faithfuls of Muslims, let alone killing them and commit violence against them. That's evil. I actually have love not just to Muslims, I love all humanity, regardless of their background, faith, ethnicity. It's all under the takreem of Allah Ta'ala when Allah says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, which means we have honored and dignified all children of Adam. So that love comes from the takreem of Allah Ta'ala to them, regardless. And no matter how much I disagree with them, with non-Muslims, meaning my brothers and sisters who are not Muslims, I still respect the fact that we are all brothers. And I am a follower of a prophet that came as rahma lil alameen, not just rahma lil muslimin. His unconditional mercy to the worlds, not just unconditional mercy to the Muslims. I believe that the line of the prophets alayhimus salatu wassalam was and always is rahma lil alameen. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's message was and always will be rahma lil alameen. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to us on behalf of other prophets. Wa inni bari'un mimma tushrikun. I absolve myself from what you commit. Inni li'amalikum min al-qaleen. I absolve myself from the deeds you do. Inni bari'un mimma ta'malun. Inni bara'un mimma ta'budun. All these ayahs tell you how the prophets went to the people and say, I am innocent from what you do. I absolve myself from the crimes you commit, from the transgression you make. But not from you. For the human being can be beloved based on the positive contribution. Allah says, يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. O mankind, the meaning of the ayah, we've created you into males and females and made you into tribes and nations so that you can get to know each other. The best amongst you, أتقاكم, those who contribute positively most. Because Islam looks at everybody, every human being out there, Muslim or not Muslim, as either a saint, wali of Allah, or potential saint. You're either a saint or you can be a saint like this. Who stops guidance and hidayah from the hearts of people? Then we have the political Islamists, obviously, or if I may use that, political Islam. And these guys are politicians who said, all right, Islam is a solution. Sure, Islam is always a solution. But it's really an ambition to reach the chair, the kursi. They want to get to sit on the ruling chair. And therefore, when they brought their ideas about political Islam, they brought a romantic idea of the past. Very romantic idea. They looked at history from a very romantic way, which is not real nor true. They took it from stories and they forgot to contextualize what they've learned from Islam. And they thought, or they sold the idea, that if you allow us to reach the chair, the ruling party, everything will turn like Umar's time, Abu Bakr's time, right away. Just once I get there, all I need to do is get there. Once I get there, everything will be solved. That did not work. And obviously after the gas and water discovery, Muslim majority communities have become the victims from both sides, meaning the side that they were abused locally and the side that they were abused by international global corporations who are greedy and don't really put any value to the human being, worth or future. And it makes no difference. What makes a difference is the money. So today we live in a time of division, my dear beloved brothers and sisters. Though I know that the khair is in the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and will stay like that till the end of the day of judgment. But when you look at the Arab and the Muslim world today, what remains? Everyone is divided. Iraq, the Iraqi is Iraqis, and the Libyan is Libyans, and the Syrian is Syrians, and the Egyptian is Egyptians, and the Yemeni is Yemenis. And this goes on and on and on and on. And the Palestinian is Palestinians. As far as sure, everyone has their own thing. When we talk about the Muslim world, what Muslim world are we talking about? The Sunni world or the Shia world? Or the Ibadi, the Khawarij world, as we call them. Excuse us, my Khawarij brothers. I don't mean any offense, my Ibadi brothers. Do we mean now which world of the believers? Alam al-Mu'mineen or Alam al-Mushrikeen? The world of Mu'mineen in some eyes, or the world of who commit more shirk in the other people's eyes? Or the people, Alam al-Mutadi'een, the world of the people of Bid'ah. Which world are we talking about? The celebrities or the unions? Is it the Azhar or the Iraq or the Iran or the Ottoman version? Which version are we talking about? I don't think that there's anyone who has been split like we have done to our own ummah. And still we have merchants of venom who all they do is fuel this divisiveness under all these pretexts. This is in the Muslim majority world. As far as the rest of the world, I don't think anyone in the world is ignorant or doesn't know that Muslims are not necessarily very well liked in the world today. Many people in the world, innocent, good people in the world, right here in the good old US of A and beyond. I travel the world. Good people, decent people, genuine people, honest, hardworking people, but they don't know about Islam. And hey, not everybody's going to go and research Islam for you, just like you may not research Judaism or Christianity and know all about it. But anyway, today Muslims are on the microscope and under the microscope. So there are calls to close mosques and institutions that increases in the world. And eventually the Muslim children and women will be sort of morally, in a sense, forced to let go of their cultures, Islamic habits, even though it's not necessarily a legal thing, but you know, it's that social pressure. The Muslim minorities in many places in the world don't know what to do. They don't have a voice to the media, for example, and because they can't really make their own station, they don't want to put money there. They don't necessarily have institutions and think tanks that are biased and neutral. They became accused oftentimes in their own society, which they love and live in, that they are societies of hate and that their children are time bombs. And therefore, we became in this situation where there is a splitting. There's splitting. You don't know. On one hand, you want to protect your deen, your religion, and you want to have a culture and language and all that. But little by little, that's being taken away from you, one thing at a time, and socially, etc. And that's why this is a phase that I call habituation and taming. That's faster than light. يعني تقليم وتأقلم وترويض, if you want it. You habituate. It becomes accustoming. And it's going to end up basically with self-denial. I'm not this. And then, live a quarter Islam, 10% Islam, or so until Allah Ta'ala knows. Today, many religious teachers, until today, and preachers, they still behave like secular politicians, meaning they sing the praises of their own denomination, decrying their rivals with scant regard for charity. And in public sermons and teachings, they rarely focus on the central themes of Quran and the central themes of Islam, which is hope, growth, opportunity, and unconditional compassion for all. Instead, what they focus is on their own group, cult-like interpretations, or abstruse doctrinal formulations, implying that the correct stance on these issues that they come up with, rather than the central themes of Islam, is the criterion of true faith. Not that, let me also finish with a couple of things. Terrorism that came in the beginning of this century and also in the past century came to have an implosion onto Muslims, or within Muslims, implosion. All right? So we all know the atrocious terrorist tragedy of 9/11 that happened in this beautiful country and that took the lives of many innocent people in the name of religion. But you all know also that what happened was not just that did not just mark an explosion that rocked the good old state of New York, but also that was an implosion to many Muslim societies from within. Muslim countries, Muslim majority communities from Afghanistan to Iraq to Syria to Somalia to Yemen to Libya, and it's going. It's going. And millions of people are that kind of syndrome or terrorism that we've now seen for the first time, because communities have been living with Islam for the past 1400 years. They would live Shia with Sunnah, with Christians and Muslims. I come from a country, I was born in Syria, and in Syria it's a mosaic of people. I went to school where there were Christians and Jews with me in class. Classmates and Christians and classmates, and we're all together, we're all this. But somehow these things now are becoming something, so that marked an era of implosion within the Muslim communities, and then that's added or fueled by thousands of Muslims who have been recruited to commit atrocities and crimes against humanity in all places on earth, even and mostly amongst Muslims themselves. This is this thing of ISIL or ISIS. They're committing things mostly against Muslims. So then what happened is Muslim youth and Muslims, they started hating their own deen and suspecting their Islam. To say, and I've received many people's calls, look, Sheikh, does really Islam allow that? They started suspecting their own faith, that their parents and they lived for thousand some years. We're not equipped. We're not equipped. Because we're still not putting our actions where it needs to be. We live in a country, the American Muslim community it's the wealthiest and most educated Muslim community anywhere in the world. We still don't have managers, media experts, journalists, experts, media, etc. We still are running on volunteers and part-time employees, and we're not running 9 to 5 like the rest of America, and we expect everyone. We're trying to do a Papa's Garage kind of a business in the masajid, and it becomes very personalized and very cultish and very my way or the highway, and the objective is lost. The world, my dear beloved brothers and sisters, knows that there's a lot of hate that some hateful groups within Muslims carry against other Muslims. And they're aware of the hate that some people teach against other Muslims, within Muslims. They know that well. And they know that some of the hate is much bigger against other Muslims, is much bigger than against non-Muslims. They know that as well. Everybody knows that. And therefore, the world knows that Muslims have a long way of self-reflection, soul-searching, and starting to walk, not claim that we've got it. Before the world believes that Islam is, which it is, a faith of unconditional compassion and salam, we need to live it in our own homes and in our teachings. I'm going to finish with this, but I don't want to tell you that I was amongst the most happiest people. Maybe there's no such thing, most happiest, whatever. I was amongst the happiest people when the Arab Spring, so-called Arab Spring, happened. I liked it. I saw what happened in Tunisia. I saw what happened in Egypt. And at the beginning of Libya, beginning of Syria. I know that our next door neighbors, meaning Romania, Bulgaria, I mean, I'm from Syria, so Romania and Bulgaria is just a country away. They were under oppressive regimes for many, many years, and mashallah, all of a sudden, became, now there's no more corruption as much. At least they became more open system. There is a political, transition. Hey, I thought that's a good thing. So I was very happy. But I am not going to lie to you. Right after a few months, especially after the Syrian thing, few months after that, maybe less than 6, once I started seeing weapons, and I started seeing some so-called preachers and scholars and spiritual leaders begging NATO, the West and the East and everyone to bomb their countries and to get weapons and bullets and to kill their own brothers who disagree with them politically or religiously, and to issue fatwas of assassination and killing, I realized that this whole thing is hoax and it's bogus. For many reasons, that's despite the very righteous claims of all these people in the Middle East that aspire for freedom and transparency in their countries. And those people are the actual victims today. They're victims twice. They're victimized by the regimes that ruled them in a tyrant way, and by the other global criminals also who are greedy, who are willing to kill everyone and everybody so they can make more money. People have nothing to do with that. Regardless what country. People are people. Humans are humans. But I'll tell you why I thought so. First, because this so-called Arab Spring did not really target all countries in that region who are saturated with corruption. Countries who don't know any meaning for democracy or human rights. Many of them. No, those countries were not touched. In fact, many of them became the mother and the father of this Arab Spring, financing it and putting all their effort behind it, media-wise and beyond. Also, I realized the spring was not genuine because it did not touch the great issues of the Ummah, qadaya al-Ummah al-Kubra. It did not even point to the big things of the Ummah. All it was calling for is uncontrolled rebellion against any and everything. Just rebel. 3, because the so-called Arab Spring did not really contain any intellectual content except rebellion. There is no madmoon fikri. There was no fikr there. Just rebellion. All I care about is toppling down the regime. And therefore, their slogan and their ijma' entirely was toppling down regimes, not reforming regimes or situations. Islah versus isqat. They wanted to do isqat, not islah. Islah is not important. Let's just take down. But We don't want to reform. And you all know, after you take down any tyrant, oppressive regime, there's going to be chaos, corruption, and much more blood. Because the next day, nobody is prepared for. Well, they're not really their own apparatus anyway. Fourth, because leading this Arab Spring, which was going to go beyond the Arab world, as many of you probably can predict. And again, I'm just a very immature political reading, as I'm not a politician, so therefore you can take my reading and throw it in the garbage if you like. But when you look at the leaders of the Arab regime, or the Arab Spring, you did not see people with experience, practical experience. But you've seen people who have been good people, who have been emotionally charged, ideal hopes, and confusion between what's real and what's ideal. There's something real and there's something ideal. But they thought ideal is real. And they didn't understand the fiqh of istita'a, fiqh of capacity, fiqh al-muwazanat, the fiqh of balancing, fiqh al-awlawiyat, the fiqh of priorities. And obviously, the fuel for all that was, again, the frivolous, emotional speeches that some preachers have done. 5. I've seen also in that teaching hate in the name of reform, of caring about everyone, but you teach hate against some people, and violence in the name of Islam. And I always thought that, this kind of Machiavellian approach doesn't work, because destruction is never a mean to construction. Tadmir is never a means to ta'mir. Killing was never a mean to giving people life that is mukallafa. But anyway, that's why I realized, or at least I think, that the Arab Spring is just a bomb that was put in the body of the Ummah. Maybe the Ummah itself put it in there, so it can just shatter it to even more pieces. Because today you see the youth are looking and saying, man, why are these people killing these people killing the other people? And they're all saying Allahu Akbar. Which Allahu Akbar is right? Hey, all these Allahu Akbars are not right, maybe. I don't, let me go to some other faith that gives me hope, gives me love. I realize that before we have a political revolution, we need an akhlaqi revolution. We need a moral revolution, an ethical revolution. We need a tarbiyah revolution, maybe. A tarbawi revolution. And the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I was sent to actually infuse akhlaq and morality. I realized that the genuine revolutionary who's sincere, without actually knowing the fiqh of the reality that he's in, is like someone who's setting himself ablaze to illuminate the path for a blind man. As far as the opportunists, حدث ولا حرج. Talk about the opportunists who thought there's something in it for them. For all these and much more, Medina was born. Medina Institute, as an idea, was born to offer hope, to connect back with the real Medina of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which was the ceiling for all people and the home for all people, which gave the whole world hope, unconditional compassion, and knowledge in a very troubled world back then. Medina wanted to go to the principles of the Quran and the Sunnah, because Medina realizes, and our vision at Medina knows that the Quran and the Sunnah are very welcoming, very merciful, very forgiving, very inclusive. But people who say they represent the Quran and Sunnah may not be, regardless who they are. The principles of non-violence and not just peace is not a Machiavellian tactic that Medina puts forth. You hear Medina's Center for Nonviolence and Peace Studies. No, no, no. This is founded in the very prophetic sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, because the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, every time he had a choice between love and violence, he chose love. And when he went back to Mecca, liberating it, after 23 years of almost these people killing the Sahaba and fighting them and all this, he told them, go, you're all pardoned. He didn't even put them to justice. The principles of love towards all and malice towards none are not an opportunistic PR campaign or lip service that Medina seeks to put out. These are all Medina's vision, mission, and the foundation of our reformist movement globally. It is to bring hope to all, opportunity to all. It's based on the Muhammadan principle, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that we may be different colors, different ethnicities, different languages, different cultures, and even different religions. But at the end of the day, we are all one people. كلكم لآدم وآدم من تراب. All of you are from Adam, and Adam is from earth. Unity, as Medina views it, does not mean conformity. In fact, we celebrate diversity. It is sunnah to look at one thing and see it in two different ways. Everyone sees part of this. And you may be drawing different part, but it's the same thing. So therefore, the goal and the mission and the vision of Medina is to return to the ancient principle that any interpretation of the Quran or the Sunnah that breeds violence, hatred, or disdain is illegitimate. To practice academic neutrality and full disclosures about others, so that our youth are given accurate and respectful information about other traditions, religions, and cultures, and encourage a positive appreciation of Allah's ways in decreeing for this world to be culturally and religiously diverse. Medina is a continuation of the original organic reformist movement of Mecca and Medina by the Prophet ﷺ himself, wants to contribute towards building a global community in which all people can live together in mutual respect, to cultivate an informed empathy with the suffering of all human beings, including those regarded as enemies to some people, and to love for each other what we love for ourselves. In practice, not just theory. Basically, a wish for a better world. That was the initial thought of the Prophet ﷺ when he was talking about Iqra. So, all of you, welcome to Medina, and thank you for listening. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam.